In a world that never stops talking, the most radical thing you can do is tune it all out and listen to yourself. We live in an age of endless noise, social media, opinions, comparisons, and unsolicited advice bombarding us every single second of every day. Most people spend their entire lives chasing a version of success that was designed by someone else. Matthew McConaughey knows this truth better than most. He spent years being told who to be, what roles to take, and how to fit a mold. Until the day he decided to stop listening and start living on his own terms. That decision changed everything. This speech is not about arrogance or selfishness. It's about the fierce, disciplined act of protecting your focus, your energy, and your vision. It's about understanding that the crowd will always have an opinion, but only you have to live with your choices. It's about silencing the external chaos long enough to hear your own voice. Because the person who knows you best, judges you most honestly, and walks with you every single day is you. This is your one life. Own it. Define it. Live it on your terms. We are born into a world that immediately begins telling us who we should be. From the moment we are old enough to understand language, we are handed a script by our parents, our teachers, our culture, our religion, and eventually by strangers on the internet who have never met us and never will. The tragedy is not that people offer their opinions. The tragedy is that most of us spend our entire lives performing for an audience that doesn't matter, chasing applause from people whose names we won't even remember on our deathbeds. We rehearse our lives for a crowd instead of living them for ourselves. Think about how many decisions you have made, not because they felt right in your gut, but because you were afraid of what someone else would think. The career you chose because it sounded impressive at dinner parties. The relationship you stayed in too long because leaving felt like failure in the eyes of others. The dream you quietly buried in the back of your mind because someone laughed at it once, and that laughter was loud enough to last a lifetime. External validation is a silent thief. It doesn't rob you all at once. It takes from you slowly, one compromised choice at a time, until one day you look in the mirror and struggle to recognize the person staring back. Matthew McConaughey walked away from millions of dollars in rom-com offers because the roles felt hollow. The world thought he was finished. His own industry wrote him off. But he was not collapsing. He was recalibrating. He was doing the brutal, necessary work of stripping away every expectation that had been placed on him and asking himself one honest question: what do I actually want? That question, as simple as it sounds, is one of the hardest questions a human being can ever face. Because answering it honestly requires you to stop caring about what everyone else wants for you, and that is terrifying. The need for validation is deeply human. Let no one make you feel weak for feeling it. We are wired for belonging, wired to seek acceptance from our tribe. But there is a critical difference between wanting connection and surrendering your identity for approval. When you live solely for the nod of others, you are not building a life. You are building a performance. And performances are exhausting. They require you to constantly monitor your audience, constantly adjust your mask, constantly fear the moment the curtain falls and people see who you really are underneath all of it. The most dangerous thing about external validation is how invisible its chains are. You don't feel them as chains at first. They feel like guidance, like love, like wisdom from people who know better. But over time, those chains tighten. Your world gets smaller. Your choices get narrower. Your voice gets quieter. And the real you, the unfiltered, unpolished, unapologetic version of you, gets pushed further and further into the shadows. Living for others doesn't just cost you your happiness. It costs you your identity, your direction, and ultimately your entire sense of self. So the first and perhaps the most important shift you can make is this: begin the slow, courageous process of returning to yourself. Not the self that was shaped by fear. Not the self that was molded by other people's comfort. But the raw, authentic self that existed before the world started editing you. This is not a single decision made on a good morning. It is a daily practice, a daily fight, a daily act of rebellion against a world that profits from your self-doubt. And it starts with one honest admission that you have been living for the wrong audience for far too long. But beneath all of that noise, beneath all of those layers of expectation and performance and borrowed identity, your real voice is still there. And that voice, when you finally learn to hear it, will begin to show you something uncomfortable. It will show you exactly where you are weak. It will show you the places inside yourself where discipline breaks down, where focus fractures, and where the wrong things pull you away from the right path. This is not a pleasant revelation. Most people spend their entire lives running from this kind of self-knowledge because it demands something terrifying: honesty. Raw, unfiltered, ego-crushing honesty about who you truly are when no one is watching and nothing is at stake. Matthew McConaughey talks about knowing your unsteady ground, and this concept cuts far deeper than simply identifying a bad habit or two. Your unsteady ground is the specific terrain inside you where your resolve goes soft. It is the emotional trigger that sends you spiraling. It is the environment that makes you forget your values. It is the person whose approval you crave so desperately that you would compromise your integrity just to receive it. Everyone has this ground. The ones who pretend they don't are the most dangerous, not to others, but to themselves. Because what you refuse to acknowledge, you can never defend against. Self-awareness is not a personality trait you either have or you don't. It is a discipline. It is something you build deliberately, day after day, through the uncomfortable practice of watching yourself, really watching yourself, without excuse, without justification, and without the flattering filter of ego. It means sitting quietly after you made a poor decision and asking not, "How do I explain this to others?" but, "Why did I actually do that?" It means tracking the patterns of your own behavior with the same cold precision a scientist applies to an experiment. Most people never do this work. And because they never do it, they keep falling into the same traps, keep making the same mistakes, keep stumbling on the same unsteady ground, and calling it bad luck. The world will always find your weak spots. That is not pessimism. That is simply the nature of life. Pressure finds cracks. Temptation gravitates toward vulnerability. The people and circumstances that want to pull you off your path do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly, dressed in comfort, in distraction, in pleasure, in the language of just this once. And if you have not done the inner work of mapping your own vulnerabilities, you will not see them coming until you are already off course, already compromised, already further from yourself than you intended to go. This is why McConaughey insists that knowing yourself is not a luxury reserved for philosophers and poets. It is a survival skill. The person who knows where their ground goes unsteady can build guardrails before they reach the edge. They can make decisions in advance, in moments of clarity, that protect them in moments of weakness. They can say no before the temptation even finishes its sentence. They can structure their environment, their relationships, and their daily rhythms in ways that make it harder to fall and easier to stay aligned with who they are trying to become. This kind of intentional living is not rigidity. It is wisdom wearing armor. But here is what makes this work truly difficult. Your unsteady ground is not always found in the obvious places. It is rarely the things society labels as weaknesses that trip the strongest people. More often, it is the subtle ones. The need to be liked by everyone in the room. The inability to sit still with uncertainty. The habit of choosing comfort over growth when no one is holding you accountable. The quiet voice that whispers, "You've done enough for today," when in truth you have barely begun. These are the cracks that widen slowly, almost invisibly, until one day the ground beneath you gives way completely, and you are left wondering not how it happened, but when it started. And the answer, almost always, is that it started long before you were willing to look. And the real looking, begins when you finally shift your gaze away from the destination and fix it firmly on the road beneath your feet. This is the moment everything changes. This is where Keynote 3 lives, in the unglamorous, unfiltered, often invisible space between where you are and where you want to be. Society has sold us a poisonous lie that success is a moment, a trophy, and a rival. We have been conditioned to worship outcomes so completely that we have forgotten how to value the process that produces them. We take pictures of the summit and never speak about the climb. We celebrate the harvest and ignore the seasons of planting, watering, and waiting in the dark with nothing but faith to keep us moving forward. McConaughey has spoken at length about falling in love with the work itself. Not the reward it promises, not the recognition it might bring, not the applause that might follow. The work. The daily, disciplined, sometimes brutal act of showing up and doing what needs to be done whether you feel like it or not. This is where character is not revealed but built. Anyone can work hard when they are inspired. Anyone can push when the crowd is watching and the energy is high. But the person who does the work in the silence, in the monotony, in the moments when quitting would be completely understandable, that person is building something inside themselves that no outcome can ever take away. That inner architecture, once constructed, becomes unshakable. There is a profound freedom that comes when you detach from the obsession with results and anchor yourself completely to the process. Suddenly, each day becomes complete in itself. The pressure lifts. Not because the stakes are lower, but because your focus has narrowed to the only thing you can actually control, which is what you do right now, in this moment, with what you have. You stop bleeding energy into anxiety about futures that haven't arrived and regret about pasts that cannot be changed. You become present in a way that most people never experience, because most people are always mentally living somewhere other than where they actually are. And presence, real presence, is where all great work is done. The process will test you in ways the outcome never could. It will ask you to keep going when the results are invisible. It will ask you to trust the work when the work seems to be producing nothing. It will ask you to find meaning in the repetition, dignity in the routine, and satisfaction in the small, quiet wins that no one else will notice or celebrate. Most people fail not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, but because they cannot endure the silence of the process long enough to reach the noise of the breakthrough. They abandon the work just before it begins to work. They walk away from the seed just before the season turns, and somewhere deeper than discipline, deeper than motivation, deeper than strategy, lies the one thing that separates those who make it from those who don't, and that one thing is ownership. Total, unconditional, uncompromising ownership of your life, your choices, your failures, your direction, and your future. Responsibility is not a burden placed upon the strong. It is the very thing that makes you strong. When you stop pointing fingers at circumstances, at other people, at timing, at luck, and you turn that finger back toward yourself, something extraordinary happens. The victim inside you dies, and the architect inside you awakens. You stop waiting for the world to change, and you start changing. You stop asking for permission, and you start making decisions. You stop surviving your life, and you start constructing it, deliberately and unapologetically, brick by brick. Most people mistake responsibility for weight. They see it as something heavy, something that pins you down and holds you accountable for every wrong turn. But McConaughey sees it differently, and the ones who have truly lived see it differently too. Responsibility is not the thing that limits your freedom. It is the very source of it. Because when you own everything, including your mistakes, including your detours, including your darkest seasons, No one can use any of it against you. You have already claimed it. You have already looked it in the eye and said, "That was mine." And in that claiming, in that radical act of ownership, you take back every ounce of power you ever gave away to blame, to excuses, and to the comfortable story that life simply happened to you. This is where the speech ends, but this is where your story must begin. Not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, not when fear finally loosens its grip, but now, in this moment, exactly as you are. Ignore the noise. Know your ground. Love the process. Chase your highest self. Own every step of the journey. Because the life you are capable of living is not waiting for you somewhere out there. It is waiting inside you, right now, asking only one question. Are you finally ready to claim it?